I come from a blue collar background. My dad was a firefighter growing up, did a lot of construction jobs in high school and things like that. I love kind of seeing that combination of the, a little bit more dressed up side, but you're still dealing with like real people and real assets. I just love that part of it. When I got my license, I was a renter, looking around at the market, seeing in 2020, all the craziness that was going on and feeling like, oh, this doesn't feel right. But, taking that analytics side of my mind and my training and looking at the data and saying, no, like the fundamentals are there. It makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the biggest stresses in either job is when you don't know what you're going to do next.
Yeah.
So if you have a game plan ahead of time and you try to think about what the potential, worst case scenarios are, it gives you a lot of breathing room so that if that comes up, you don't have to panic. You don't have to overthink it. You know what your next steps are.
Okay, here we are, another episode of Rate of Success podcast. I'm very excited today. I'm joined by Jack Sheahan, and he is someone that I've known for quite some time. And the exciting part is, which I'm excited to kind of talk a little bit about, is, Jack is a firefighter.
Yeah.
And then somehow got drawn in to be a realtor. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But Jack, why don't you tell me a little bit about how long you've been in the real estate business?
Sure.
And how you got into the business?
Sure. So, really, it started for me, over 10 years ago. When I was in college, I was one of those typical college students that wasn't really sure what I wanted to do after I got out. I have a cousin by the name of Tim Sheahan. He does a lot of work in real estate in Roscoe Village. And at the time, he was a partner at a company called Conlin. I reached out to him to see, hey, could I possibly intern with you over the summer? And it ended up being that summer where the market really bounced back after the Great Recession. So he was like, hey, I might not have a lot for you to do, but, I'll have you hang out for a month and, maybe I can find somebody else to help you do some stuff so you can learn some skills. And then it ended up being a summer where I think I saw him in the office about 4 times the entire time we were there. So, but it was great. And I really got a strong feeling towards it. A lot of times I think when you're younger and you're thinking, am I going to go like a business route or whatever, you're looking at maybe doing like the financial field or whatever, but I just really felt a calling to be around like tangible things. And I come from a blue collar background. My dad was a firefighter growing up, did a lot of construction jobs in high school and things like that. So I love kind of seeing that combination of the, a little bit more dressed up side, but you're still dealing with like real people and real assets. And, I just love that part of it. So that kind of was the where I got bit by the bug.
Yeah. So what year did you actually get licensed in?
I got licensed 3 years ago. So after I graduated, the one thing I will say about the industry, as I'm sure anybody who's gotten their license knows, is you kind of got to have a little bit of a war chest to get going. So, as a 20-odd-year-old college student who was honest with myself, I kind of knew I needed to polish up on my sales skills a little bit.
Yeah.
I went more of the corporate route. But I did stay kind of in an adjacent industry. I worked for James Hardy for 5 or 6 years as a territory manager for them in Chicago. And then I took a position for them out on the East Coast where I was like in Philly and Jersey Shore and Delaware. So that was a really cool job.
Is that the siding company?
They are.
Okay, perfect. So So do you lean on that at all? Because obviously you know a lot about siding, and is that knowledge of being,
I loved it. It was such a cool job because they're a domestic manufacturer, which I took a lot of pride in. One of the few companies that really makes building products in America. And we had a lot of different, we had kind of like a push and a pull strategy. So, a lot of it was working with distributors and vendors, but a lot of it too was working with end users, homeowners, contractors.
Yeah.
All sorts of people that were involved. At one point I was working, with a new product line. I was dealing with architects, which was kind of a new customer that we hadn't really talked to before. So it was just a great experience to like learn about different things, kind of, and they gave me the freedom too to be creative. And I feel like, I learned a lot about how to look at data, how to, get creative with problem solving and things like that. So it was kind of a great benefit for me later on when I got my license.
Yeah. Did you lean on that experience a lot day to day?
I do. Yeah, for sure. I think, one of the things that was great was like, especially, in my capacity as a territory manager, it was a lot of responsibility, not only on managing business, but growing new business. And I had to look at things like what the housing market was doing, what the starts looked like talking to national builders, talking to distributors, you're really looking at the market analytics, which is something that has tremendously helped me
Yeah.
in real estate. None of us are what was it, Madam Cleo was her
Yeah,
name, right?
exactly.
With
Yeah,
the
yeah.
crystal
Well, I
ball.
mean, data is so important now. And I think especially after everything that happened last year with NAR and things like that, like the realtor being more the center and the focus and buyer consultations and all these things, the more data you have, the more you can help and educate people. So I think you being able to kind of absorb that, learn that from a prior industry, there's a lot of people that shy away from that. And is there anything that over the last 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, like the data, is that something that you've had to lean on a lot more than you have in previous markets?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for sure. I mean, to a degree, I guess like any market you're in, you're going to have to look at the data and stuff like that. But I'll tell you, for me personally, what I think helped me, especially early on, was there was my gut feeling as somebody who, when I got my license, I was a renter, looking around at the market, seeing in 2020, all the craziness that was going on and feeling like, oh, this doesn't feel right. But, taking that analytic side of my mind and my training and looking at the data and saying, no, like this, the fundamentals are there. It makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you look now and everybody who bought and maybe were a little bit nervous about what was going to happen in the short term in 2020, 2021, even, 2022.
Yeah.
They all look great now.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
the
it's
appreciation has been amazing since
right.
then. Yeah.
Because
yeah.
at the end of the day, and I talked to a client about this, it's looking to do some investing. I said, hey, at the end of the day, we can look at things and be very complicated, but if you want to macro level it, like there's supply and demand, and it really does come back to that. And, until we get significant supply on the market, the rates and all those other external factors are only going to push the envelope, so much one way or the other. And I think when we look at the fundamentals of the market, we are, still in the seller's market despite everything that's happened over the last 5 years.
I mean, I think one of the words I always use is education. I think education is such an important part of the real estate market today because, and that thing I always say too is, I always say at the beginning of any presentation I give is, do you have a relevant opinion that's based off of fact?
Yep.
Because a lot of people, to your point, you said your gut, but a lot of people have opinions on the market or they read a news story, but the data doesn't lie. And the more that we can share data, it may, help someone make a decision to move forward, but it also may help someone make a bad decision.
Yeah.
Okay. Or avoid making a bad decision. So I think data is really, really important from that standpoint. And I think for Illinois, it's so different than the rest of the country too, is that we have to be experts in our particular market. And I think now more than ever, people are so hungry for that data. And when you avoid giving it to people, I think it's a huge disservice to the consumer.
I totally agree.
Yeah, exactly. So where did the firefighter piece of your journey start?
So like I mentioned, my dad was a firefighter for a very long time. So I kind of grew up in that. It was also something like I liked it, but I did go to college. I played football in college, so I didn't know if I was going to be more of a traditional kind of white collar career or go towards that. But he strongly encouraged me, take the fire test for the city. They only come out every once in a while, and you don't know when they call you. And it might be 5 or 6 years. You might want to take it. Yeah. Well, sure enough, my number got called right when the pandemic happened. So even though I still had some job security in my position, it seemed like a very good opportunity at the time. And, it was nice to have the option to kind of pursue that too. So my plan had always been, I loved working for my company, but I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, run a business type of thing. But I did want to have, there's a service part of it and the fulfillingness in that way, but I also wanted to not just have to totally jump in with both feet and try to, maintain a lifestyle, 100% all on my own. So.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. So, I mean, what was it like following in your dad's footsteps? Because obviously growing up as your dad being a firefighter, you obviously had a really good, idea of what that looked like. So what was that like, kind of stepping in and doing that after watching your dad do it for so long? Yeah,
I mean, it was really cool. I was, like I said, I wasn't the kind of guy like following my dad around wearing this stuff all the time. But like I always had like pride in that, the fact that my dad did that. There are a lot of things I liked about the job. I like the character of the people. And a lot of that has to do too with like the same reason I like real estate, like working at Hardy. salt of the earth, blue collar, down to earth people that, care about the important things,
Yeah.
and are, concerned about family and
Yeah.
things like that over other things. So, when the opportunity came for me to kind of take that path, I was really excited for it, and I still am. I still really like doing it.
So, being a firefighter, obviously, it's a kind of a career built on trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And also, obviously, being a realtor, it's built on trust. So how have the two, being a firefighter, getting into real estate, how do you kind of connect those two to kind of help in both? Because obviously trust is such a big part, very different. Obviously a firefighter is way more important. You're saving lives, but there's so much trust that's needed in real estate. So how much do you have being a firefighter has kind of helped you become a better realtor?
So, it's funny that you say that. Like, we have a saying on the fire department, and I'm sure it's not just in Chicago, but your reputation will follow you everywhere.
Yeah.
And that is 100% true for being a real estate agent. So, when I got involved and got my license, I joined a team with my Aunt Ruth, who, was how we met each other. And she's, one thing that stood out to me when she was telling me how her team operates is, it's referrals and working with people that we know, and, we have to have trust there, because if we do the wrong thing, it's going to come back to hurt us. And that's how I always operated my business when I was managing it, working for Hardy. That's how I'd like to operate in the fire department too. And that's how I think you should do business. I think that anybody who benefits in the short term from, messing somebody over, it never works out in the long term. So.
And so being a firefighter also, I think you have to have a lot of teamwork.
Yeah.
And a lot of very quick decision making that happens, being a firefighter. Okay. And, how does that play into, when you're working with a buyer or a seller? Because again, a lot of those same attributes become very, very helpful and valuable in our market,
right?
Because you're used to that, on your feet, thinking quick, moving quick. Do you find yourself or maybe you don't notice it because you're in it and you're so used to it day to day, but do you notice that at all, that you can move quickly and react quickly and not overreact? Because again, we say fire drill, but a fire drill in real estate is nothing like a fire drill in your world. So do you find yourself able to kind of handle those situations a lot better?
I think and I think it falls back to even what we were talking about with knowing the data and things like that.
Yeah.
In a similar way on the fire department, we have what's called general orders. Hey, this is what we've learned from experience. This is how we operate, and you're thinking about scenarios that may come up and what to look for and how you should react to them.
Yeah.
So, having the knowledge ahead of time gives you that ability to act decisively in a quick situation when you have to make a decision in a matter of seconds or minutes.
Yeah.
In a similar way too, when you're working with buyers or sellers, knowing the market, knowing your past experience gives you the confidence to be able to speak with authority when you are making recommendations, so that you aren't just kind of pulling things out of the clouds. When you're telling people things that are important and it is important, it might not be life or death, but it's a huge thing here.
Is there anything that helps you, or any lessons that you've learned that help you when things don't go great during real estate? Because obviously, I think that's the heart. You can teach someone a lot of things about real estate, and you go through all the training, okay? But until you're kind of thrown in the mix when something doesn't go as planned. But does your experience as a firefighter kind of help you through those things?
I do, because I think, again, it's one of those, you try to think 5 steps ahead, right?
Yeah.
So, hey, if you can really know what the worst case is and then be like, okay, if the worst case happens, plan B isn't that bad, then you're able to, communicate that with your clients. And then also, if it does come up, then you know what you're going to do. You're not, I think one of the biggest stresses in either job is when you don't know what you're going to do next.
Yeah.
So if you have a game plan ahead of time and you try to think about what the potential worst case scenarios are, it gives you a lot of breathing room, so that if that comes up, you don't have to panic, you don't have to overthink it, you know what your next steps are. And I think that's huge. I think that's a huge part of being effective.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that working with you is that you seem very, always very even keel. I don't see a lot of emotion either way, which is great. Because I think sometimes
I'm just good at hiding it then.
Well, I know. Well, but there's a skill to that.
You're right. No.
That
I appreciate that.
You can inside you're maybe really anxious or disappointed or whatever, But I think the best people in our industry can really stay they don't get too high when things are going great, but they also don't beat themselves up too much. And they don't let it show, either to the client, to me, to anybody. And again, that's something you just can't teach people. But I feel like maybe that comes more from your experience being a firefighter. I had someone in my industry one time at a sales conference. Their husband was a brain surgeon. Okay. And the analogy she gave is like, when I come home and I'm complaining about my job, my husband looks at me like, are you kidding me? Like, I just did brain surgery today. Like, you're worried about and it just puts it in perspective for one brief moment. And sometimes that, roller coaster ride that we go through can really prevent us from being a great resource to our client or be able to advise in the best way. And that's one thing I've always noticed about you is like in negotiations or things, like you're always very solution-based. I say that a lot. Like, you're not thinking about the problem, you're thinking about the solution, and you're kind of going towards that. So
I appreciate that.
Is that all directly from being a firefighter, or do you think
I think that's just part of it, but I also think part of the reason I like being a firefighter comes from having that a little bit before I got that job too.
Yeah.
It's something, playing sports, playing football for many years, you have to be able to adapt, right? I played offensive line. We have our plan going in, but then maybe the defense is doing something that you're not expecting and you have to adapt, right? And the best teams are able to adapt, and you have to lean on your teammates and, hey, we were going to do it this way, we got to do it that way. And then even just in general, growing up, in the type of environment where a lot of people were blue collar, I think you kind of like, okay, hey, we got this came up, we got to fix it. How are we going to do it? And, I think that type of mentality just lends itself well to both.
Yeah, and I love you brought up sports because, I played competitive sports growing up, not in college, but just growing up, I was always in sports. And I think there's a lot of analogies that you can take from sports that you can also apply to business. A lot of the disciplines, commitment, and all these things that people have to do to be successful in sports and being on a team, obviously. How much do you think having that background in sports really kind of shaped growing up on how you are today and your personality? Did you draw in that experience a lot?
I think it did, for sure. The one thing about me was like, I cared about sports. I invested a lot of time in sports, but I also was not the person where I made that like my entire life. If we lost a game and I felt like I did everything I could, if I prepared as good as I could, I tried to always take away the positive versus like dwelling on the negative. So in that aspect, I think that also helped, because I think you can go a little too far either way too, where if you become obsessive about your job or even the sport you're playing or whatever, sometimes you miss the forest through the trees and what you're supposed to get out of things. But I think there were great lessons, and you deal with different personalities and different coaches and different guys on your team, and you got to learn how to work with people that maybe don't think like the way you do.
So that's the same thing that you do every day and both your jobs.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what, if you don't have that experience, we're going through that with my son right now. He's playing sports, and, it's like most of the parents are so worried about, their kid being great. And really the only thing that I'm worried about is the experience of being on a team, losing, failure, like all those things that you learn in sports, really, I feel like define your ability to absorb those same things later on in life. And there's so many analogies that go to sports that I draw on every day and think back when I played sports. And, I know a lot of athletes always say that you learn more in failure than you do in winning. And I think that's one of the best things that in our business, I feel like, there's a lot of times that I think we fail more. We don't get the offer accepted, all these different things that happen. Like, you got to be able to absorb that and not let it like beat you up, and then be able to still provide the best level of service to everybody else. And I think, having that sports background is interesting. We've never actually discussed sports, but it now makes more sense, knowing that you played competitive sports.
If you don't take learnings out of failures and losses, then there's just no point in really doing anything. I feel like, wins feel great. And I think you do need to be the person that appreciates the goodness. You do have to celebrate wins. And I think that's something that you can go the other way too far in that too. But 100%, if you're not learning from where you failed or thinking about what you could have done better to make a difference, I think that's something in sports that trains you very good as a young person to really be successful.
So one thing I wanted to ask you too, change the subject a little bit, is we had this. You got in 3 years ago, so you were on the very tail end of this amazing market. Okay, where I joke about it all the time. Like, we all thought we were amazing. Our phones were ringing, market was busy, and we were all busy. And then the market obviously shifts. Rates start moving higher.
Yeah.
So what has that been like kind of over the last 3 years? Because over the last 3 years, honestly, we've had 4% change in rates.
Yeah.
Like, it's been probably one of the more unique times in our market. And if we look back 10 years from now, we'll probably 15, 20 years from now, probably be one of the most unique 3 years that we've had. We had the NAR lawsuit. We've had, interest rates. We've had inventory. All this stuff had a pandemic.
Right.
Okay. And again, you're a firefighter. So the pandemic was busy for other reasons. Yeah. Okay. So what was that like, now that things are starting to get back to a normal market, as we'd say, as close to normal as possible? Are you glad you got to experience, that craziness? Yeah. And do you find that you'll be able to lean on that years from now?
I think the best thing about it was that, and this is something that Ruth told me about earlier. She's like, people are going to be looking to see if you're still here in a year or two.
Yeah.
When you speak about things, like they'll listen to you, but they're going to really listen to you if you keep talking and you're still here.
Yeah.
And being kind of thrown into the fire, pardon the pun.
Yeah, I like it.
But and that was part of the reason too, where I really wanted to be an agent, but I wanted to do it once I got on the fire department.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like, hey, you know what? I'm on the fire department. My wife and me can have our meals and pay our bills.
Yeah.
And I can actually focus on this the way I should be, not out of desperation, but really trying to learn, get better at the craft, build the business, and not have to worry about the responsibilities that come with being an adult, if it's your full-time only source of income. And I think that helped tremendously. And being in a rough market, the same way I mentioned when I first entered for my cousin, 10, 15 years, I can't, time goes by so quick now, it's so hard to think. I think it was
2010, 2011, probably.
Yeah, it must have been. Wow.
Yeah.
He didn't know what it was going to be like, and he was a very successful agent, and it ended up turning around, and he was a guy that stuck it out, all the way through that whole bad recession.
I think being in markets like this can allow you to learn during a time when most people don't show up when times are rough.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
And if you just show up and you're present, you're already 80% ahead than everybody else. Because, what's happened over the last couple of years is a lot of people, have not shown up.
Yeah.
They're waiting for the market to change. Oh, once rates go down, it'll get good again. Well, there's other people that are growing their market share. Okay. And there's other people that are doing more business. And there's really no difference between the two, other than one person is really just they're not dependent on all these other variables. They're more worried about their activities day to day than they are what's going on around them. And that's really different.
If you think about too, like when all the major changes in our industry happened, the environment of the world as a whole, there was uncertainty in everything.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, then housing on top of it, you're going from, I can't buy anything because I'm competing with 15 people to, I don't want to buy anything because now the rates are up and what's going to happen. And, there's a lot of people that were my age that in 2008 saw how bad things got. And, I think seeing all those things and you think back to it, that was kind of going back to the data thing where even for me, I had to take some of my bias out of stuff and be like, all right, what does the data actually say?
Yeah.
If I'm going to talk to people and say, hey, I know what I'm talking about, I really want to be able to point to hard numbers and then tell you this is why I'm interpreting it that way. And if you have a different interpretation, I'd love to hear it too. But I want to just show you what I'm looking at.
Being in the firehouse, is there something that, like a theme that a lot of the firefighters have about real estate that you're constantly correcting? Is there something that you're having to, because now they know you're a realtor.
Yeah.
Are you the guy that they come to, or they try to say, hey, well, Jack, what about this? And you're like, oh, no. This is what it really, is there something?
Yeah. I mean, it changes, the biggest thing I always hear now is like, oh, I wish I had bought 5 years ago or 4 years ago. I'm like, well, I tried to tell you then. But I think after people saw, no, the prices are still going up. Despite the interest rates.
I think it's a great point. I just did a presentation this morning, and one of the things we talked about is expected appreciation over the next 5 years.
Right.
And we're using just very conservative appreciation levels that I think are low. and we're still seeing anywhere between 3 to 4% using those to make money over the next 5 years. Like the inventory is so low.
Right.
Like there's really no, and you have so many projected buyers that are re-entering the market. I think it's like 79 million millennials. And then you have the homeownership rate, if they increased, like 16 million of them will be able to purchase over the next 9 years.
Right.
Then you have Gen Z, I think there's like 20 million that could purchase over the next 10 years. Like you get all these numbers. We're only building 1 million homes a year.
Right.
And there's no catalyst for home prices to go down with inventory the way that we're at now. I think that's hard for people to understand.
No, for sure. I saw something the other day, and it was kind of like about the boomer, inventory, and like that's still going to take till 2035 to really feel like in the market, and that's a ton of it. That's
and 40% of them own their home free and clear, so they're not going to want to sell until a life event happens where they die or something or stroke or a medical event or something, because they own it free and clear. What are they going to downsize to? You
have a huge portion of free and clear, and now we have a huge portion of sub 3% or 3% mortgages.
Yeah.
I mean, where is that? They're not going to want to really move up interest rates unless they get close enough where it makes sense to grow into a bigger space. And that's the other thing that comes up for me now. There's a lot of guys, that on the other side of things are in a position where their family's growing and they want to buy bigger houses, and they feel like, a little bit, I don't want to say trapped, because they're in a good situation, but they don't want, it's hard to trade a, high 2-3% rate.
Absolutely.
And the prices are up. So, as much as they have a ton of equity in their house, it is a trade.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I noticed that a lot of firefighters have secondary, jobs.
Yeah.
Like they like to do other things. So, and obviously you're a realtor.
Yeah.
Is that a reflection of the time that you have, or is it more a reflection of you have a stressful job and this other outlet gives you something to keep your mind away from that for a little bit and enjoy yourself and do something else that kind of helps, kind of get away from that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd love to actually see a real psychology analysis of the personality type. But I think a lot of us are very, driven in one way or the other. A lot of former athletes, a lot of people that like to be competitive. But then also back to the trust thing. I mean, we trust each other, and when you have something wrong at your house, the first thing you're looking for is somebody on the fire department, because again, like I said about the reputation, hey, if this guy does a bad job at my house or does something bad to me, it's gonna get around. It was we had
you can't hide anywhere.
We had Yelp before the internet with that, so. I think that's a big part of it. We do have very interesting schedules where we work a lot, but we also get chunks of time off that allow us to be able to, spend time with our family and dedicate time to other things too, where you can manage doing both. Whereas even at a regular, 9-to-5 job, I think they technically work less hours than us, but it's very hard to go and spend consistently 8 hours a day during the workday where you have no ability to do anything else, and then also do something else,
Well, plus you're staying at the firehouse, you're there around these people. I mean, this is essentially your
it's
family.
A second home.
It's a second home. It's your family. You're spending sometimes more time with them than you are with your family. So, I mean, you have to get along. You have to have great teamwork. But I noticed that a lot of them have, these other careers that they enjoy doing. But it makes sense, because I feel like, I think time is one thing, but I think there's more to it. Would be an interesting study.
I think it's a personality type thing more than anything else, And the other thing too, probably that plays into it, is when you actually look at the one psychological thing I did see is if you look at, job satisfaction ratings, firefighters are, I think, almost always the top. And I think when you're happy doing what you're doing, then if you do take on something else that maybe is adding stress, if you're happy at your main line of work, you have that flexibility, bandwidth wise, to dedicate yourself to doing something else.
So as someone that, you have a new baby, okay, you're a firefighter, you're a realtor, what's kind of the secret to kind of time management?
Do you know? Because I would love to hear.
I mean, listen, I definitely struggle with, doing one career and being there. It's funny. I did this thing yesterday over the weekend where I asked ChatGPT to roast me based on all the stuff. And I said, "Oh no!" I go make it more hurtful, or I did something because I was with some friends and we were out, and like I started reading it to my wife, and my wife's like, "This is you, like this
Oh
is
my
you," like it was
gosh.
like because it was
Oh,
like
that's so funny.
so it's kind of funny, but I think it's tough. Like I think it's something that we're always trying to battle
Yeah.
is trying to be a great father, great husband, good to your clients, good to your employees. Like I wish there was a hack for it, but I think it's something you learn more and more each and every day.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
then as your kid gets older or as your family grows, like you have to change. I don't think there's ever like
Yeah.
a shortcut. I was just curious if you had
I think,
anything that you
I
lean
mean,
on.
100%, having a great spouse, it makes a humongous difference. And somebody who, when you check in with them, like, hey, like I have in my head that I'm going to dedicate time to doing this. Like,
Yeah.
are you okay? You know, and I think it's like, you got to have your priorities, right? Like, I mean, for me, it's like, obviously if you're on a fire scene, the first priority is, are there people inside?
Yeah.
Right. Then it's, let's put the fire out. Then it's, let's try not to damage property.
Yeah.
So, I think you have to kind of do the same thing. Sometimes things are going to be shuffled around based on the urgency.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to prioritize that way. And then also, I think if you have a great team, professionally, and then in the household, checking in with them, making
Yeah.
sure you're working well together, making sure that they are getting what they need, making
Yeah.
sure that, and trying to stay on the same page with people. I think one of the worst things people do is either A, not ask for help, or B, not check in with people
Yeah.
to see how they're doing too.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that you mentioned your wife too, because one of the first questions I ask everybody when they want to get into the mortgage business is I always ask, like, what's your home life like?
Yeah.
Because I feel like, our significant others are the ones that kind of make what we do like possible.
Right.
It's a teamwork. When you're taking a call, when we're on the call at 9 o'clock at night, both of our spouses are, we're taking time away from
Yeah.
them because we're negotiating an offer.
Right.
And all the sacrifices that people make, if you don't have support at home, this isn't possible.
Right.
Now you're a firefighter, you're at the firehouse, it's even a further sacrifice. So, I'm so glad you brought that up because I think it's such an integral part of what we do that gets overlooked.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes it's hard because you do have to be able to say to people, like, I need this time for my family.
Yeah.
And, this is important, but it's not the highest priority
Exactly.
right now for my time. And, I will say that's, I think the hardest part of growing up is just figuring out the time management on everything. But
It's hard.
if you keep your priorities in check, I think that makes a big difference. And sometimes you got to be able to say no, even when you don't want to. And it's not because you don't want to do something. It's because you have a higher obligation to something else. So I think that kind of helps.
And I think too, what I always say is like when you are attracting and getting referrals from people, people will wait for you because they want you.
Right.
Okay. When you are lead driven and you're trying to get leads, it's speed to lead.
Right.
Like you have to drop everything to do it or they'll call someone else.
Right.
I think the beauty of working by referral and having that mindset and that business, if you were to say to someone, they call you like, hey, Jack, I want to go start looking at home. Okay, well, I'm busy this week, but hey, we'll get together on Monday next week. They're going to wait for you because that's you're the person they want to work with. And I think the more we can build our business like that and work by referral, I think that's the secret because then you can make everything work the way it's supposed to.
I think too, it's like, how much you have to be honest with yourself about how much you can really do. And especially when you're talking about like a client focused business, like we're in, you can't take away something important from them because you're overestimating how much time you have to give.
Yeah.
And that's why for me, being on my team is like a huge selling point for me. I tell people on the fire department, look, if we're on different shifts and I can't be somewhere and it's a great house and you need to see it, either somebody in my brokerage that I'm tight with, I'll have them show it to you, or my team will step up and go show it for you. And you have to lean on your partners, That's why, great lenders, great lawyers, they trust you and everybody's got to trust each other. And, the more you work together, the synergy, everything grows together. And I think sometimes people get short-sighted on trying to take everything on their own, so that they can grow individually faster. But I don't think it really works that way.
No, and I think that's where teamwork and your experience with teamwork growing up, playing sports, Firehouse, it all leads into why you're successful at real estate because, it takes a team to be able to do that. So, so one of the things I wanted to kind of touch on is kind of, because I see it more and more each and every day, is I see a lot of people enter the market, okay? They want to buy, they don't get an offer accepted after 3 or 4 times, and then they're out, okay? May not be my client, but I hear this over and over again. So what do you think the biggest mistake that buyers and sellers are making right now in the market that you can, avoid by maybe working with you? Or what is something they can do to better understand the dynamics of a market to not make that mistake?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple different things that go into that. On the buyer side, especially, the one thing that has shifted with rates and things is that you do see like a big weird drop off in demand between houses that like need maybe, a good amount of work in them versus houses that are like move-in ready or currently updated.
Yeah.
So, there's certain houses where you try to go get into them and they're already under contract before you even have a chance to show them.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, there's houses that sit on the market for 3 weeks, 4 weeks that, they need work. So if you're a buyer that's willing to take on work, I do think that there are ways to get deals in the current climate. But for a lot of people, it sometimes doesn't make sense to not buy the house that's already done because, having that built in your mortgage versus getting the construction loan, you might come out better on your monthly payment just buying the more expensive house and having that in a 30-year mortgage versus like a 10-year construction loan where the rates would be much higher.
And I always say too, like the biggest mistake that I see buyers make, and I see this more and more, is like people think because it's listed on Zillow or Redfin that's all the inventory. What people don't realize is that there's a whole nother market on the private network that's not listed on there that get bought and sold every single day before it hits the market. And if you're not working with a realtor, you're not getting those access to those listings.
Yeah.
And that's where it's so important to use a realtor's relationship with other agents to know about listings before they're in the private network. I mean, think of, all the realtors that that have listings that are going to list the market. Sometimes they'll send it out to everyone and be like, hey, I got this great listing, or you're talking to someone, you'd be like, oh, I maybe have a buyer. Let me know when you're ready. Like those types of things, you do not get when you're just looking every night on Redfin and Zillow. There's zero advantage to that. So is there anything you talk about with buyers and sellers to make sure they understand that there's like this whole other market that they're not even aware of?
Oh, for sure. So, I mean, one client that I can talk about is my brother.
Yeah.
So I helped him around this time last year buying a house, and we were looking at different houses for a while. We found a great house, and it was on the private listing network.
Yeah.
Wasn't showing. I called the agent. Hey, can we come see it? Go in. He really liked the house. And I had to tell him, like, look, you got to trust me, give him a little bit more to get the house before it goes on the market.
Yeah.
We've seen what's on the market. It's still a great deal here. The seller will feel good about not testing the market and giving you the house before it really gets out to everybody and everybody can look it up online. It's hard when you're a first time buyer to be, I'm going over it. I'm giving them more than they want to get the house. And that's where you have to kind of work with somebody that you trust, where when they're telling you that, it's like, I'm telling you that because I'm looking out for your best interest. And if it wasn't a good deal, I wouldn't tell you to do it. If I thought it was overpriced, I wouldn't tell you to do that. And then even my mom at the time was questioning. I'm like, Mom, I know what I'm talking about. Now this year comes around, she's like, oh, I see his house on this estimates or whatever. And, I can't believe how much more it is and you pay for it. I'm like, that's what I was trying to tell you last year.
So on that, is there something particular different about working with family than there is? Because obviously you've been there.
Yeah.
Like, so what is that dynamic like? Because I know what it is for me.
With Ruth, it's been great.
Yeah.
It's been nothing but positive.
Yeah.
When you're working, I think a little bit closer, little brother, talking to your mom, things like that, that's where I think the lines can get a little bit blurred. And, one of the funny things that came up was like, my brother hired me and I was trying to help him find a house, and he was, moving into his first place, and staying at my mom's temporarily while he was looking. And so she, of course, wants to know everything that's going on. And I'm like, hey, I have confidentiality to Luke. You want to hear it? Ask him. I'm not telling you. And so she finally beat him up enough that he gave her permission to give me permission to tell her stuff. But like, that's a good example of where I'm like, they're like, oh, you know, come on, I'm your mother. And I'm like, I know, but you know, I take it seriously. And,
Yeah.
you know, he's my brother. Even though he's my brother, I'm not, you
Yeah.
know, gossiping with you about what we're doing.
Exactly. You know, working
I
with
mean,
family is always interesting dynamic. Working with friends is another interesting
yeah,
dynamic. Co-workers, I'm sure you're dealing
yeah,
with as a fighter, takes on a different. But I think when you have a good business and a good team, it's a lot easier.
yes,
I
yes,
think where people struggle with that more is when they don't have that and they run the risk of, you know, kind of reputation and, you know, or they have bad character and it doesn't,
right.
you know, so I think that, you know, struggles a little bit. So, what would you say to other buyers who are hesitating to enter the market, okay, because of all these things we've talked about today, and you know, whether it be rates, affordability, all this stuff, because the average first-time home buyer age last year was 38. Okay, so think about that, highest ever. Okay,
Wow.
10 years ago it was 28. Okay, so average first-time home buyer last year was 38. So we could go through a variety of things, but the one thing I've always talked about is imagine a buyer purchasing at 28 versus one that, you know, purchases at 38, and what that looks like by the time they get to retirement from a equity standpoint, retirement, all these types of things. Not everyone's going to have this huge retirement account or a pension or something else. Like real estate sometimes is 70, 80% of what people retire with.
Yeah.
Okay. And they're losing out on 10 years of appreciation. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there anything that when you sit down with a buyer and they have like hesitations that you really lean on as far as data points or anything that you talk about? Because
Yeah, I'll give you the anecdote
Yeah.
first because you know we got a guy who's new in the fire department in my house, and he's very young 20s. He's you know I think 23 years old. And
Yeah.
He just bought a place, and fortunately he didn't meet me in time. But but you know it's hard as a young guy. You know he's worried. Did I make the right choice? Am I over my skis? I got to fix this. I got to fix that. And I walked him through what it's going to look like when he's my age, and he's got and the 10 years that are going to go by in the blink of an eye, and how much better off he is than anybody you know at that age owning a property and the advantages of that. And he's like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize all that. I just figured I should do it because I could. And I'm like, you made a great choice. You know, it's awesome. You know, there's so much you can do.
Yeah.
You know, so there's that part of it, but. As far as what I tell people, you know, especially because we are kind of the renter generation now.
Yeah.
You know, take your rent, multiply it by 12, and then do it times 5, and then you tell me how much money you're going to spend on rent in 5 years. Compare that to the worst case scenario you think is going to happen if you buy a house and the value goes down in 5 years.
Yeah.
Are you going to buy a house to plan on moving in 5 years as an investment? Then you have to think about those things.
Yeah.
But if your big concern is I'm worried about buying this and then you know, something happening that I'm not expecting in the market, you know, dropping the value of my home, which we aren't heading that way and we haven't been.
Yeah.
But okay, play that out.
Yeah.
So let's say, I mean, if it's $2,000 a month, then you're what, $24,000 a year. Do it times 5. We're almost at $125,000. Do you think your house is going to be $125,000 under?
Well, and think about, you know, buying at 23, 24, 25, the difference in that in 10, 15, 20 years when they, you know, get married in their 30s and have a kid and now have this equity built up in a property, like that's life-changing, you know, for someone. That's security. It's, you know, it gives them the ability to have, I mean, listen, I wish I would have done it all over again. I had 2 interviews with 2 loan officers the last 2 episodes, and one of them bought at age 20, a multi-unit. The other one bought a multi-unit at 23.
Yeah,
okay?
You don't really hear too many like that didn't work out for me stories about
No,
that.
it's like, and it's like, God, I wish I would have done that at that age. Like, because I waited so long, and I was in my 30s before I bought my first real estate. And it's just like, you know, to be able to do that, if I could do it all over again, I wish, and I hope, and I think that's what we may start to see is, to your point, you brought it up, we didn't talk about it, but a lot of, I think, millennials saw their parents go through the housing crisis. I think psychologically there's something there where
I think it scared the whole
exactly,
generation.
and I think that generation has fear, a lot of fear about housing. That maybe the younger generation not going through that, you know.
Well, and and the other thing too is like the scar is there when it comes to housing, but like they still pay into their 401ks and everything because
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
so,
Yeah.
You know, hey, don't forget that part of it too.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know that it's smart to save for retirement, but you're scared about buying a house because you're worried about, you know, being underwater your mortgage or something like that. But at the end of the day, you got to look at what's happened. If you didn't play the stock market over the last 20 years, and how much money you lost out on, look how much equity people have lost out on not buying. And even back to the point of the people that bought and have the low rates that want to move up, if they had been renting the whole time, they're still in a better position to move up now than they would have been if they had just been renting the last 5 years, right? They got a house with equity in it.
Well, I always think about it too, like the stock market. I always think about on September 11th, dipped below 10,000, and now it's over 40,000. It's crazy. Like, it's so same with housing. Like we have this, but sometimes it's just this.
And you
mental
can't live
block.
in your 401k.
No, exactly, exactly. So, what about the seller side? Do you feel like seller side? Obviously, interest rates.
Right.
Okay. Do you experience a lot with, well, I got to sell and I got to buy. I can't, it's easy to sell, but I can't buy. Do you deal with that a lot?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's always kind of hard to know, am I putting the cart before the horse type of thing, looking to move and things like that. I mean, the good thing, what helps you on one end kind of hurts you on the other sometimes, right? Like, hey, when you go to sell your house, you're especially if it's in great shape, you're going to have multiple offers. And, it should be you should be feeling great and sitting up on high. And then when you go to move in your new place, you're going to be the one in the rat race. So you do have to balance that for sure. I think you have to have the right reasons for moving, and stick with that and fall back on that when you're having doubts about, maybe it being a harder process and things like that. But, one of the things I do see people do is like, they all want to put money into their house right when they're getting ready to list. It's like, hey, like, you don't even get to enjoy it. If there's things you want to do at your house, do them while you're living there. And then,
do you feel like sometimes they do it, but they do it in a way that maybe the buyer wouldn't even want?
Well, that
so
too.
It kind of defeats.
Right. I think there's like a handful of things that are like very small investment, very high ROI that make a big difference when you're going to list. But like, do the things you want to do in your house. That if you're going to redo your kitchen in a way you like it because you're planning on selling your house, then do it when you're going to live there. And then the buyer can be like, okay, I got to change it.
Well, because everyone wants to make it their own. So I think sometimes, and I think in this market too, with inventory as low as it is, I just wonder what because usually the cost is going to be way more than what you're going to get returned. Now, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, and there's certain areas where you can make money by doing some small things. But I think it takes expert advice of someone very knowledgeable of what that would be to get that return on investment. And I don't know if it's always there.
No, I think, clean, have the place very clean. Yeah. Clean your windows, pay somebody professionally, clean your windows, paint, make it look nice. If it isn't in, a totally updated place, make it so that they can walk in and see the vision of it, But I think that if you want your house a certain way, make your house your own while you're living there. And then don't do things just because you're worried about the value of your home in 5 years or whatever. People should enjoy their houses and make their homes their own. I really believe that. I think we're in this weird mindset where a lot of people buy a house and then they're afraid to do things they want to do with their own house because they're worried about resale value. Do what you want to do in your own house, and you'll, when you got to move or if you have to move, you'll figure out, where you got to make those changes.
Exactly.
Enjoy it. Enjoy it while you own it.
That's 100%.
People, they don't really take into account, like, hey, you have the right to enjoy the property. That's like the best part of owning versus renting versus anything else. It's yours. Enjoy it. Do what you want with it. You want your walls pink? Do it. You want to sell your house? You can paint the walls. It's enjoy your place for what it is.
Yeah. So one question I wanted to ask you is, obviously being a Chicago firefighter and having a lot of experience in the city. Okay.
Yeah.
You do also business in the suburbs. Okay.
Yeah.
I think people sometimes don't understand the differences in the markets between Chicago, inner city Chicago versus Chicago suburbs.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, there's two different markets going, obviously a lot more condos. Okay. Do you see any migration trends of people still moving out of Chicago, but now moving back in? Like, do you see any trends that have kind of changed over the last couple of years?
The only thing I kind of am keeping my eye on now is to see if this whole like work from home trend that we really hit hard is going to start going away more and more. Mm-hmm. You start seeing like a lot of commercial space kind of vacant in the city. And I know these companies are going to want to get people back in the office eventually. So we'll see if that has an impact on it. As of right now, I think you do still see a lot of people moving out to the burbs just to be able to spread out a bit. That being said, too, Chicago is a massive city. So, I mean, there's neighborhoods with, where I grew up, You know, the lot is enormous. You know, my mom's house is a nice big frame house. It feels very suburban. So every neighborhood's different in Chicago, just how the suburbs are
Yeah.
different from the city as well.
Are there some areas that are really kind of trending a little bit like hotter right now than other areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're kind of like the areas that have been trending hot are continuing to stay
Okay.
hot. You know, obviously that whole Lincoln Park, Northwest Side, Roscoe Village,
Yeah.
those type of areas are doing well. Southwest Side, you know, Beverly, where I grew up. The funny thing for me is I basically lived in all these places at this point, which
Yeah.
is cool. But
Yeah.
but you know, they're all doing well. People are investing in them. You know, in Chicago, you see a lot more remodels than new construction in some cases. A lot of people don't want to tear down a brick bungalow. It's a lot nicer to just make it bigger.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, whereas out here you don't have that old
Yeah.
construction, and you know, it's not Chicago brick buildings.
I was going to say those brick buildings are they're like a fortress. And
Right.
you don't want to lose that. Yeah.
For sure, for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, the one thing I would say like about where I'm at now, and especially city worker neighborhoods, because part of city workers all have to live within the city limits, so there's kind of like enclaves of
Yeah.
where people concentrate. A lot of the area closer to O'Hare, closer to, you know, the real far northwest side, it's getting very expensive. It's getting hard for young guys and girls to buy a house out there, and have a family. You know,
You think they'll ever change that requirement to live in the city to help with that, or no?
I don't know. I
Yeah.
have no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they don't want to, but
Yeah.
you know, what I would say is I do think that you will start seeing more and more development of the areas pushing out from there.
Yeah.
Kind of like what we saw with like Lincoln Park always being kind of a more upscale area around DePaul and everything. And then, you know, North Center, Roscoe Village used to be a very, you know, kind of blue collar area. Now you can't buy a house under $1 million
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think that's kind of the natural flow of what happens is, you know, once one area gets a little bit overpriced for the traditional people that
Yeah.
live there, you know, the opportunities kind of are forced to spread out. So I'm seeing a lot more, like, especially around where I bought, in like kind of the Dunning, Portage Park area. I'm seeing a lot of investors going to there, and because there's opportunity for them
Yeah.
to buy and fix a place up and make a profit. A lot of families moving into those areas. So, you know, I think that's kind of one of the things that always is going on with Chicago.
Yeah.
You see areas kind of change and grow bigger.
Yeah.
But you know, some spots I hate to say they're tapped out, but like there's not a ton of opportunity for
Like
you know,
a
middle-
first-time home buyer.
yeah,
or
first time
someone- yeah,
buyers
yeah.
And even middle income. It's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard.
So one of the things I've seen a lot, you touched on a little bit, is work from home. So one of the things that I've seen, and I'm just one loan officer, so again, it's a small, but I've noticed this trend a lot more, is I had a lot of people move out of state during COVID, Tennessee, Carolinas, Florida,
Yeah.
Texas, all the typical places, Austin, all these places, even Arizona. I've had a large amount of them move back, and it's all for two reasons. One of them is they get a job offer in Chicago for way more money than what they can make where they're at, okay? And they're required to be in office 1 or 2 days a week,
Right.
okay? So they have to come back. The other thing I've seen more than anything, as much as we all complain about our school systems in Illinois because of taxes, but that's the other thing I've seen
Yeah.
is a lot of people come back because maybe where they moved, they didn't like the school system. So I have seen very firsthand, we always hear about everyone moving out of Illinois. I have helped a large percentage of people moved back because they were able to make a lot more money, you know, being close
You're
to the
right.
big city like Chicago. And I think these companies that are in Chicago know that. And I think they're attracting a lot of top talent from surrounding states and otherwhere because they have more money they can offer them. But to your point, they want to have people in the office 1 or 2 days a
Right,
week, which,
right.
you know, I don't know if that's going to continue to grow to more days per week. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Because I've had some people that I've talked to where they're required to be in the office
Well,
more
that's
and
where
more.
too. I think, like, you know, look where we're at right now. I mean, we're
Yeah.
10 feet away from the metro.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the things that I think are going to make a big difference for the suburbs. How accessible is the city to the suburbs? If you got to go in 2 or 3 days a week,
Yeah.
a train ride isn't that big of a compromise. If
It's
you're
28 minutes from here on the express. Like it's
right. I mean, I can't even
yeah.
I couldn't even drive my car from the city to downtown in 28
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah.
So, I think that's a big part of it. You know,
I think it's quality of life is what I always
Quality
hear
of
people
life,
talk
yeah.
about is like when you can get into the city quickly and not sit in traffic and you do that, it's
Yeah.
better quality of life to be able to do that.
Oh yeah, who wants to spend, you work 8 hours and you spend 2, and then there's 2 hours you spend in your car every day. I mean, it's terrible, right?
Oh, it's
Nobody
crazy.
wants to
Every
do
time
that.
I drive downtown or come back and it's 2 hours, we had a event on the south side. We were driving out there last week and it took us like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And it was like, I was like, how do people do
I
this?
don't know either.
Yeah,
I
it's
hated
crazy.
it.
Yeah.
I hated it.
Yeah.
That was always my least favorite thing of anything. I can drive. I did outside sales.
Yeah,
and I do this. I can drive for hours. I'm great. Bumper to bumper traffic. I torture. I can't stand it. Even if, I did 2 hours on the highway free and clear versus a half hour of that.
Yeah.
But I will say one thing I did see, because I've been talking to a couple investors and we're looking for some opportunities and things. I mean, one thing I saw in the areas around here is that the listing versus sales price, the listing price can't keep up with the sales price.
Yeah. No, it's crazy.
So I mean, they can't even comp. The agents can't even comp the houses out accurately because of how demand.
We just had an offer this weekend. There were like over 40 offers.
It's insane.
It's like, how do you, if you're an appraiser, if you're a buyer, if you're a listing agent, like how do you advise a client?
I was seeing a 20% discrepancy between the listing and the sales price.
Yeah. And there was someone that came in and offered just so far over, and the listing agent basically told us, like, listen, like they put an offer so ridiculously over and they waived appraisal and they just don't care. Like there's people out there that have just don't have any other choice, that they're going to get a house and they're comfortable with that. And that's a difficult market to be in. But I will say this, there was a lot of people during November, December, and January that got really good deals. I can say that because while everyone else was inside waiting for weather to get nicer, they were able to negotiate a little bit. They weren't waiving appraisals. I had a lot of people get really great offers accepted in December and January when everyone else was not as active.
Oh, it's the best. I mean,
rates were a little bit higher. And I think that's the takeaway, is that the more disruption we have in the market, if rates go up a little bit or do anything, that's the time to strike.
Right.
If you're waiting to enter the market like everybody else, it's going to be very frustrating. And I think that's the hardest part of getting offers accepted is waiting for the perfect moment.
100%. Yeah. I mean, if you're in a position where you can start looking early, like look early. If you find
100%,
you're going to have less to look at, but if you find the house that you like in December or January, like that's a home run.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing better than that.
Yeah.
We have it doesn't matter what's going on with anything. Even in 2008, the prices in December versus in April and May were, the seasonality of our market is wild.
In my presentation this morning, I showed how price appreciation starts to skyrocket in February.
Yeah.
It's like February to like May, and then slowly kind of deteriorates. To your point, average sales price versus list price, it just skyrockets from February, during the busy time, and then slowly kind of goes down the rest of the year. One thing I did want to talk about before we ended up was, Jack has invited us the last, it's been 2 years?
I think, 2.
2? Yeah. So we worked together on an event, and I wanted to make sure that we talk about that. So why don't you talk a little bit about the baseball game?
Oh, yeah. No, you guys been great. Yeah. So I mentioned my dad was on the fire department. He actually, and he's the type to not take credit, but he kind of really started this game at the time, Comiskey. Actually, was it U.S. Cellular Field in 2001? I can't even remember. It's guaranteed rate field.
Yeah. So, but it's gonna be rate field now. Yeah.
But he did it after 9/11. It was really cool. I was a bat boy at the first one. It was awesome. It was a way to raise some money for the widows and the fallen guys in New York. And then it's just kind of crazy over the years. I kept doing it, and I think they're coming on close to 25 years now or whatever. So once I started doing this, one of my dad's friends is operating the team now, and I was like, I'd love to be involved as a sponsor, and was able to reach out to you guys and partner with you to do it. So I mean, it's just been awesome. It's been really cool to be able to participate in something that my family has a history with and kind of support. As an adult.
A couple of years we had the one location that was over by O'Hare.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and we did. And I will just say this: like my first time going, I didn't really know what to expect, and it was very heavily attended.
Yeah.
But what I was surprised, I don't know if I should be surprised, but the quality of baseball was actually really good. I was expecting a bunch of guys just going out and playing a game, but
Right.
like these,
No,
this was the real deal. Like these guys were like real baseball
very
players.
competitive, for sure.
It wasn't like a charity softball game. This was, was like, it looked like baseball, which was
anytime,
really fun to watch.
you know, the firemen and the cops play each other in anything, it's going to be, be competitive.
Yeah, it was fun. And just the crowd, it was a lot of families. I highly suggest, if there's a website or something, we'll put it at the bottom of we'll put it at the bottom of the description.
Yeah, I know. Like every year, they kind of got to work out with the stadiums, you know, what the actual dates will be. But the team is the Bravest baseball team. I think that they have it on Facebook.
Yeah.
But it's great. And like you said, too, you know, now they try to play other games. They were able to get one in at Wrigley last year.
Yeah.
They did Rosemont 2 years ago. So, I mean, it's just cool to see it. And, you know, if they do as many as they can. But still, you know, the White Sox is still the big one every year. And it's awesome. You know,
and it's not just for firefighters. I think that's the great thing. From the spectator side, I think it's great to support. So it's definitely something that I've told many people about because I thought it was a great event.
It's fun. Fireworks after the game.
Yeah,
I mean, they really do it like a big show.
Yeah,
you know? So that's cool.
No, it was great. It was great. So we'll be doing that again, hopefully this year. So the last thing that I always end with, pretty easy. So we'll have a little fun. So if you weren't in real estate, if you weren't a firefighter, okay, what kind of is something that you're passionate about or something that you could see yourself doing if money wasn't an object?
Yeah, I'd probably be in politics.
Oh, politics.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. I did not expect that answer. I love it. So do you find yourself very interested in politics and kind of following politics?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I majored in.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
You know, probably a little too
much. No shortage of politics to talk about.
That's true.
Today. Right. Now, do you get
at the firehouse?
Well, I was going to exactly. Do you get in a lot of conversations?
I mean, we all talk, you know, and you know, the good thing that is probably still the one workplace where you can talk about things that people have very different opinions on, and at the end of the day, we still you know, nobody's hates you.
That's good though, because that's the way it should be, though. If you think about it, like I have a group of friends, we're the same way. And we always talk about politics and we have different opinions, but I think that is so healthy in a lot of ways.
It's really what it was. I mean, that's really how it should be.
So much of right now is unhealthy when it comes to politics. And it's so like toxic is the perfect word that you use, that I think people have lost all common sense about, you know, I mean, basically democracy is us having a difference of opinion and compromising and coming up with, you know, a plan.
Right.
And, you know, I think that's what makes everything so great is having, and I think that always is the best about a great team is people have different opinions.
Yeah.
And being able to still get along and kind of set aside. And with my friends, it's always like we'll give each other, or you know, a little, you know, crap about, you know, something, and we laugh about it and then we move on. But unfortunately, sometimes you just can't do that anymore.
No, I think, you know, the biggest thing I see is like, you know, you should have your opinions, but you know, and it should be like anything else. Like it shouldn't be like a reflection of how you feel about me if you disagress with my point on
exactly.
Something, right? We should be able to like learn from each other, you know, get different perspectives.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and that's what we do every single day too.
Right. With everything else.
Yeah. When you get a fire call, you're not thinking about
it's like back to the sports thing. It turns into like, you know, Sox versus Cubs. It's like, guys, like same city, right? Like, come on.
Exactly.
You know, we don't have to hate each other over it. Like, you know, we both have our reasons.
I lived here my whole life and I've still never understood the Sox versus Cubs hatred.
I grew up on the South Side. I don't understand it.
I know. It's crazy. Like some people, like whenever you go to the game, I always get
fun.
Well, I know it's fun, but I remember going to the game. I always get so uncomfortable with some of the fans, like because it's like, oh my god, like there's like my son's like 8 years old sitting next to me. It's like he's got to listen to this. So, but I remember when my parents moved here in 1980. Okay, and I'll never forget. Went to a Hawks game in like 1982, and sports were just different back then. It was at the old stadium. Okay, and I was in kindergarten. Okay. You could smoke in your seats at the stadium. Okay, so there's smoke everywhere. Every time they scored a goal, we were right underneath like the thing. We got beer poured on us. Now, this is my memory as a kid. That's a
great experience.
And I have a good memory.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And everyone was like, you know, drunk and having fun. And nowadays it's like, you know, they kick people out for that, like 2 minutes after it happens. It's just different times.
Right.
Yeah. But as a kid, that was my memory, you know, that I tell my dad all the time. Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah. Of course. Well, you know, Jack, I really appreciate, it's been a pleasure to work with you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
And, you know, there's you know, in this business, you meet a lot of people and you come in contact with a lot of people. And, you know, I've always enjoyed working with you. I always appreciate the way you treat my team, you know.
Oh, they're great. I love your team.
And that, you know, that seems like you're going to take it like, oh, you know, but, you know, majority of the time, that's not always the case.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, and I appreciate, you know, you and Ruth have been so great to me and always including me and inviting me to do, you know, these sponsorships and things like that mean a lot to you, but they end up meaning a lot to us at the end of the day. So I just want to say thank you for that. And, you know, I'd love to sit down with you again in the future after we get through the, you know, maybe the summer market. We'll have an update on where things are. But I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to
thank you.
sit down.
And, you know, for me, having somebody that I can always trust when I refer my clients to them are going to do an outstanding job and care as much about them as I do, you know, and I love working with you guys. I love your team. I can't believe anybody would ever give you guys a hard time, but
well, I appreciate that very much, and we appreciate working with you.
No,
till next time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
It.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.